Rome's legions conquered the known world. They crushed Carthage, they dominated Gaul, they steamrolled over kingdoms that had stood for centuries. But there was one enemy they couldn't defeat, one weapon they had no defense against. It wasn't an army, it wasn't a navy, it wasn't even Cleopatra herself. It was her secret sorority, the cult of desire, a network of the most beautiful, most intelligent, most ruthlessly trained female operatives in ancient history, deployed across the Mediterranean with one mission: use pleasure to extract secrets, use intimacy to destroy Rome from within, and use their bodies as weapons more devastating than any sword. This is the story of the black magic Cleopatra used to steal Roman secrets, and how her cult of female spies nearly brought down an empire without ever setting foot on a battlefield. Let's start with something historians refuse to acknowledge. Cleopatra's palace in Alexandria wasn't just a royal residence, it was an intelligence headquarters, a training facility, a deployment center for covert operations that made modern spy agencies look primitive by comparison. Ancient sources mention the extraordinary number of beautiful, educated women in Cleopatra's inner circle. They describe them as attendants, handmaidens, companions. But that's cover. That's the official story. The truth is far more calculated and far more dangerous. These women were agents, operatives, spies trained in a curriculum that combined linguistics, pharmacology, psychology, seduction, and lethal loyalty to their queen. The recruitment process would have been systematic. Cleopatra didn't just grab random beautiful women off the street. She identified potential candidates from across her kingdom and beyond, young women who demonstrated exceptional intelligence, who could master multiple languages, who showed aptitude for memorization and analysis, who possessed natural charisma and the ability to read people. Beauty was important, yes, but it was just one factor among many. What Cleopatra needed were women who could operate independently in hostile territory, who could think strategically under pressure, who could extract information without arousing suspicion, and would die before betraying their mission. Once recruited, these women underwent training that would last years. First, languages. Every agent had to be fluent in Greek and Latin at minimum. Many learned Aramaic, Hebrew, and various Egyptian dialects. The goal was to be able to operate anywhere in the Roman sphere without raising linguistic red flags. But it wasn't just vocabulary. They learned accents, regional dialects, cultural references. They could pass as a Greek merchant's daughter, a Syrian widow, a Judean priestess, whatever identity the mission required. Next came the art of seduction, but not in the crude sense most people imagine. These women were studying human psychology decades before it would be recognized as a formal discipline.
They learned how to read micro-expressions, how to identify what a man truly wanted versus what he claimed to want, how to mirror body language to create unconscious rapport, how to use touch strategically to lower defenses and build trust. They practiced conversation techniques that made men feel understood, validated, intellectually stimulated. They learned timing, when to advance and when to withdraw, how to create obsession through calculated unpredictability. But the real weapon in their arsenal was pharmacology. This is where the black magic comes in. Ancient Alexandria was the world leader in chemistry and botanical science. The agents of the cult of desire had access to compounds that could alter consciousness, lower inhibitions, enhance memory recall, or induce a state of suggestibility that made information extraction almost effortless. These weren't the crude poisons of assassins. These were precision instruments, substances that could be administered through food, drink, perfume, or skin contact that would leave no trace and produce no obvious symptoms, but would make a man more talkative, more trusting, more willing to share secrets he'd normally guard with his life. One compound frequently mentioned in ancient sources is a mixture based on mandrake root, opium derivatives, and certain fungal extracts. In controlled doses, this combination produces mild euphoria, reduces anxiety, and critically impairs judgment while leaving memory and speech relatively intact. A man under the influence feels relaxed, confident, connected to his companion. He doesn't realize his normal filters are disabled. He doesn't notice he's revealing information he shouldn't. And the next day, he remembers the encounter as pleasant, but can't quite recall all the details of what he said. It's the ancient equivalent of a truth serum, and Cleopatra's agents were masters at its application. The perfumes alone were a science. Egyptian perfume makers had access to ingredients from 3 continents. They understood which scents affected male neurochemistry. Certain musks and ambergris compounds contain molecules structurally similar to human pheromones. Mixed with opium-based oils that absorbed through skin contact, these perfumes created an olfactory assault that bypassed conscious thought and triggered primal responses. A Roman official meeting one of these agents wouldn't consciously realize why he found her so compelling. His brain was being chemically persuaded that this woman was special, trustworthy, desirable in ways he couldn't articulate or resist. Now, deployment. How did these agents actually infiltrate Roman society? Some were placed in Alexandria itself, which was full of Roman officials, merchants, and military officers. These women would appear at social functions, temples, markets, anywhere Romans gathered. They presented themselves as Greek courtesans, which was socially acceptable, or as educated companions, which was exotic and intriguing. A Roman general visiting Alexandria might meet a fascinating Greek woman who spoke flawless Latin, who understood Roman politics, who seemed genuinely interested in his work. They'd talk, she'd laugh at his jokes, she'd ask intelligent questions about his campaigns, and bit by bit, evening by evening, she'd extract the information Cleopatra needed. Troop movements, supply routes, political tensions back in Rome, personal rivalries between generals, which senators could be bribed, which officers were disloyal. But the really sophisticated operations involved deep cover agents sent to Rome itself. These women would establish false identities in Roman society, maybe as a wealthy widow from the provinces, maybe as a trader's daughter. They'd integrate into social circles, attend the right parties, befriend the right people. And then they'd target specific individuals. A senator with access to military planning, a general's aide with knowledge of upcoming campaigns, a treasury official who knew where Rome's gold reserves were stored. The agent would engineer an introduction, cultivate a relationship, and begin the extraction process, all while appearing to be nothing more than another foreign woman navigating Roman high society. The loyalty oath these women took was absolute. Ancient sources hint at elaborate initiation rituals in Cleopatra's palace. These weren't just symbolic ceremonies, they were psychological programming designed to create unbreakable bonds. The agents saw themselves as sisters in a sacred cause. They were protecting Egypt. They were serving their queen. They were part of something larger than themselves. This created operational security that modern intelligence agencies would envy. Even under torture, these women wouldn't betray their sisters or their mission. They'd die first, and several did. The black magic aspect also included what we'd now call psychological warfare operations. The agents didn't just extract information, they planted disinformation, they sowed discord. They manipulated Roman politics by feeding different information to different officials, creating conflicts and confusion. Imagine a senator who trusts his beautiful Greek companion completely. She tells him that another senator is plotting against him. She shows him a forged letter as proof. Now Rome has two senators at each other's throats, distracted from the real threat, which is Cleopatra consolidating power in the East. The agent has turned Rome's political system against itself without anyone realizing they're being played. There's evidence this network operated on a massive scale. Ancient sources mention mysterious outbreaks of intelligence leaks in Rome during the period of Cleopatra's peak influence, military plans that somehow reached enemy hands, political secrets that became public at strategically damaging moments, generals who made inexplicably poor decisions as if they'd been fed false intelligence. Roman counterintelligence was baffled. They were looking for male spies, for military infiltrators, for corrupted officials. They never suspected that the real threat was the charming Greek woman at the dinner party, the fascinating companion at the bathhouse, the sympathetic confidant in the senator's private chamber. Julius Caesar himself might have been an early target. When Cleopatra first gained access to him in 48 BC, she didn't just seduce him personally. She likely deployed her network to map his entire organization. Which of his officers were loyal? Which were ambitious? Which were vulnerable to bribes or blackmail? Within months, Cleopatra had a complete intelligence picture of Caesar's operation. She knew who to cultivate, who to avoid, who to manipulate through proxies. This is why she was so effective at maintaining her position despite being vastly weaker militarily. She had intelligence superiority. She knew what Caesar was planning before his own generals did. With Mark Antony, the operation was even more sophisticated. By the time Antony arrived in the East, Cleopatra had refined her system. She had agents embedded throughout the Roman territories. When Antony started making his disastrous political decisions, giving away Roman lands, alienating his supporters back home, it wasn't just lovesickness. He was surrounded by Cleopatra's network. His closest companions, his advisors, possibly even some of his military staff had been compromised. They were feeding him information, shaping his perceptions, isolating him from dissenting voices. The cult of desire had created a bubble around him, where the only reality he perceived was the one Cleopatra wanted him to see. The Battle of Actium makes a lot more sense when you consider intelligence operations. Mark Antony's fleet was larger and should have won, but his battle plans were somehow known to Octavian in advance. His supply lines were disrupted. Key allies failed to show up or switched sides at critical moments. This looks like the result of comprehensive intelligence penetration. Cleopatra's agents had mapped Antony's entire operation and possibly fed that information to Octavian's forces, either deliberately or through captured operatives. The battle was lost before it began because the intelligence war was already over. Now, here's where Roman paranoia becomes understandable. Octavian and his advisors realized they weren't just fighting Cleopatra. They were fighting an invisible network of female operatives that had penetrated Roman society at every level. They didn't know who was compromised. They didn't know which beautiful foreign woman at a social function was actually an intelligence agent. They didn't know which of their own men had been turned. This creates institutional paranoia that's corrosive and destabilizing. You can't trust anyone. You can't speak freely. You start suspecting everyone. Roman counterintelligence operations became brutal.
After Actium, Octavian's forces hunted down known associates of Cleopatra throughout the Mediterranean, but they couldn't identify most of the network because the agents operated under deep cover with false identities. Some were surely caught and executed, but many escaped. They melted back into the population, changed identities, disappeared. And here's the terrifying question: what happened to them? What happened to dozens, possibly hundreds, of highly trained female intelligence operatives who suddenly found themselves without a mission or a patron? Some probably retired quietly, but others might have continued operating, selling their skills to other powers, training new generations of agents. The techniques of the cult of desire were too valuable to just disappear. There are hints in later historical sources of similar networks operating in the Roman Empire during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Beautiful, educated women who seemed to have unusual access to powerful men, who always seemed to know things they shouldn't know, who left behind devastated officials and mysterious intelligence leaks. Were these the descendants of Cleopatra's cult? Women trained in the same techniques, carrying on the same tradition? The black magic didn't die with Cleopatra. It couldn't. Knowledge that effective doesn't just vanish. It gets preserved, transmitted, adapted. Some researchers believe the techniques survived in various forms. The Byzantine Empire had sophisticated female spy networks. Islamic caliphates employed similar operations. Even in medieval Europe, there are accounts of noble women who functioned as intelligence agents, using intimacy as their primary operational tool. The specific methods might have evolved, but the core insight remains. Powerful men have vulnerabilities that can be exploited through strategic intimacy, and a well-trained female operative can extract information more effectively than any amount of torture or bribery. Modern intelligence agencies understand this. Every major power throughout history has employed some version of honey trap operations. But what made Cleopatra's cult of desire unique was the scale, the sophistication, and the institutional support. This wasn't a handful of operatives deployed occasionally. This was a systematic program with dedicated training, logistical support, and strategic direction from the highest levels of government. It was intelligence warfare as a core element of state power, decades before Rome even understood that such operations were possible. The Romans eventually won, but they never forgot the lesson. The paranoia about foreign women, about Egyptian influence, about the dangers of Eastern decadence, that persisted in Roman culture for centuries afterward. That's trauma. That's the institutional memory of having been thoroughly penetrated by an intelligence operation they never saw coming and barely understood even after it was over.
Octavian didn't just defeat Cleopatra militarily. He had to spend years dismantling what she'd built, hunting down her agents, closing the intelligence gaps, and rebuilding trust in Roman society. The victory at Actium was just the beginning. The real war was against the network. And here's the final disturbing thought. We know the cult of desire existed because we can see its effects. We can see the intelligence failures in Rome. We can see the pattern of compromised officials. We can see the systematic nature of the information leaks. But we don't actually know the full extent of the network. We don't know how many agents there were. We don't know all of their targets. We don't know which historical events that we attribute to other causes were actually the result of the cult's operations. How many Roman decisions were influenced by information planted by Cleopatra's agents? How many political conflicts were manufactured? How many generals made fatal mistakes because they were fed false intelligence by women they trusted? History is written by the victors, and the victors have every incentive to downplay how thoroughly they were penetrated. Rome couldn't admit that they'd been systematically compromised by a network of female spies operating out of Alexandria. That would be humiliating. So they wrote the story differently. Cleopatra was a seductress who corrupted individual men through beauty and witchcraft, not a spy master who ran sophisticated intelligence operations that nearly brought down the Republic. The cult of desire was erased from history, reduced to myths about temple priestesses and Eastern mysticism. The black magic was reframed as literal magic, not the very real psychological and chemical manipulation techniques that it actually was. But the evidence is there if you know where to look. The fragments of ancient sources that mention Cleopatra's unusual number of educated female companions, the Roman accounts of mysterious intelligence leaks, the pattern of compromised officials, the paranoid security measures Octavian implemented after Cleopatra's death, the systematic hunting of anyone associated with her court. You don't do all that if you're just worried about one woman's personal charm. You do that when you're trying to dismantle an intelligence network that represents an existential threat to your power. The cult of desire was real, the black magic was real, and the possibility that some of that knowledge survived, that some of those techniques are still being used today by people who understand that the most powerful weapon in human history isn't nuclear bombs or cyber warfare, it's the ability to make powerful people trust you, reveal their secrets, and serve your interests while believing they're following their own desires. That's still out there. That's still possible. Because Cleopatra didn't invent human vulnerability. She just understood it better than anyone before or since.
And understanding that profound doesn't disappear. It gets passed down, refined, adapted. The sorority might be gone, but the knowledge remains, waiting for someone brilliant and ruthless enough to use it again.